Hello, and welcome to Chapter 1. We have 4 modules in Chapter 1. We've got what is mind mapping, the history of mind mapping, mind mappers in history, and then a few facts and figures about mind mapping. Well, what is mind mapping exactly? Let's start with a definition that's very, very important. Now, mind mapping can be seen as an act of identifying and naming our thoughts and ideas, even often emotions, and arranging them in a hierarchical classification. Now, this is kind of strange and a little bit interesting because mind maps, for the most part, are flat. They're flat on a page, they're flat on a computer screen, and they appear to be non hierarchical, but they are very much a hierarchy. You start with a central topic. You then move out to, through the branch, or the relationship. Branch and relationship are one and the same. You then hit a topic, and then that particular topic almost acts as its own node. And then there's another relationship to a subtopic or multiple subtopics as well. Sometimes there are certain additional relationships between the nodes or the topics or the subtopics. So you'll see them sometimes cross-referencing. They will loop back in some cases with arrows, almost like you'd see with a flow chart. And it really allows you to ultimately hierarchically arrange your content in such a way that you're able to better visualize it. Mind maps are very, very visual, and also better understand the ordering and classification of information, data, facts, emotions, and so on. And as I tell many, many people, very often the best way to think about a mind map for a very quick visual is to think of a galaxy. Think of a sun in the center of the galaxy. Think of the planets around that sun. And then think of the moons, if there are moons around different planets. And that gives you a really quick visual representation. Although that's a little bit 3D, you can still, nevertheless, understand. You can see the relationship because, again, it's very visual. Mind maps are deliberately visual. The other thing about mind maps that is very interesting and important to understand is that they are very much aligned and represent what we would see inside someone's mind. If we were to look at the physiology of the human brain, we would see nerve cell, we would see nerves, we would see brain cells, and in fact that is part of the inspiration of modern mind maps, is that they look like brain cells, where you have the center of the nerve cell and then you have the various branches coming off the center of the cell, and those are dendrites and axons and so forth. So in large part what we see with mind maps nowadays is represented based on physiology and even physics. We can go back in time and take a look at how people once thought about and used mind maps, and also look at what people do now, and we'll see that they are in large part very, very similar, very interesting. Now, let's move on and take a look at the history of mind mapping. The history of mind mapping is really quite interesting, and there is a big, big reason for this that we'll talk about in future chapters. But for now, just realize that mind mapping and mind maps are not the same. The act of mind mapping is a creative act. It's an act that can help you organize your thoughts and help you plan ahead, can radically improve memory, in fact, and can improve efficiency in a profound way. Mind mapping in history, the act of creating or doing mind mapping, actually traces back to the 3rd century BC. The ancient Greeks were known to use mind mapping, for example. In fact, the technical term to describe mind maps, taxonomy, is in fact Greek. There are even references to mind mapping and taxonomies in the Bible. For example, Adam naming the animals represents a type of taxonomy or a naming system. And this way of organizing information, this taxonomic classification and taxonomic organization of information, indeed is a certain kind of mind map. Now, that being said, virtually all mind maps, modern mind maps in particular, virtually all mind maps are very visual. There are topics and subtopics and lines between or relationships between topics and subtopics, and very often there is a flow of information or a flow of relationship between those various topics and subtopics or those various nodes. Another interesting fact about the history of mind mapping is that it is a worldwide, a global phenomenon. We can find mind maps in, of course, ancient Greece. We can find them in use all over Europe, India, and Asia. We can find the use of mind maps in different religions. We can find uses of mind maps in science and technology, as well as agriculture, as well as other places that are surprising. A great example of that actually is a family tree. In large part, a family tree is a mind map, a hierarchical representation of information. People, obviously clustered together based on family relationships, and over a period of time. Not quite the same thing, not literally a mind map, but they are very, very similar in nature and flavor. Another thing that is super interesting about mind mapping in history is that in large part, the vast majority of mind maps back in time were drawn by hand, and quite literally they were drawn. Concepts and topics and nodes and clusters of information were put together using circles and triangles and other very simple objects, squares, rectangles, and then arrows and so forth. So very, very simple drawing tools, very simple drawing concepts were used to collect, gather, and otherwise organize simple and complex information that was still readily understandable in the form of a visual representation, that is, a mind map. And this has allowed people to more quickly understand, that is, more quickly learn and better remember information. We are very, very good, humans that is, are very, very good at memorizing certain types of information, certain visual information. Landmarks, in essence, are being used with mind maps. This goes back as far as recorded history, in fact. So if we fast forward to the middle of the 20th century, and we then move to the latter part of the 20th century, and we start thinking about the various computers that are available and the computational tools and other sorts of technological tools that are available. Now putting together a mind map is incredibly easy with the advent of, at first, very expensive paid software programs, and now many, many mind mapping software programs are absolutely free. Of course, not all of them are free, but many are free, easy to use. Some of them you download to your computer, some of them you use right through the internet. And this will continue to evolve. As time goes on, we will see a continued use of mind maps. They're great for numbers, they're great for letters, great for words, great for concepts. And because they are so visual in nature, they allow people who are visual learners and visual thinkers to much better understand the material. And people also who are auditory learners and also enjoy reading and understanding through the written word, they also benefit because they're getting the information through yet another channel. Now let's turn our attention to mind mappers in history. Let's first talk about Porphyry of Tyrus. He's a philosopher first known to use mind mapping as a form of teaching to others, which brings up a very, very important point. If you're having a hard time as a teacher or trainer getting across a certain point or a concept, or you're trying to be more flexible in terms of presenting or providing information to people, what better way than with a mind map? And this is what Porphyry of Tyrus had learned, that he could teach others a lot more information much quicker than he had ever been able to do before by using a mind map. Next, we have Leonardo da Vinci, very, very well known. Da Vinci used mind maps primarily for note taking. So the difference here is, for the most part, that Leonardo used it for his own personal reasons. He wasn't using mind maps to spread content and ideas and knowledge throughout the world through mind maps. Instead, he was collecting, organizing, gathering, and putting together information for his own use. And this allows anyone, allows you, it allows me, it allows all of us to more quickly get our minds around very complex topics. We're able to break down content into atomic elements, and we're also able to take those atomic elements, ideas, concepts, and so forth, and build them up into molecules, or in this case, build them up into groups or categories of information. And that's exactly what Leonardo did for himself. Albert Einstein, also a heavy user of mind maps, obviously a genius of the 20th century. He rejected, in large part, certain types of linear, numerical, even verbal and creative thinking. He used mind maps in some very unconventional ways, and he used mind maps to create or generate unconventional thinking. It's part of where his actual creative genius came from, according to Einstein himself. Like Leonardo da Vinci and Galileo, actually, before him, they believed, people like Einstein, they believed that using these tools are very, very useful in expanding the way that we view the world. And they are more important in capturing our imagination than almost any other type of tool, because they allow us to visually represent and visually explain to other people what it is we're thinking in a way that is very simple. When we have content that is organized and structured, it is much easier in that case to understand ourselves and to teach to other people. It forces, in fact, clarity of thinking. What Einstein said specifically is, imagination is more important than knowledge because imagination is unlimited. This sums it up. That is what it takes. You must take the imagination and you must bottle it up in such a way that you can spread it, share it, teach it, train it, understand it yourself. And what better way to do that than with a mind map? Darwin, also a user of mind maps. Beethoven, Dr. Collins, he's known as one of the fathers of modern mind mapping. In fact, some people would say he is the father of modern mind mapping because of his extensive commitment to publishing research about creativity, graphical thinking, learning, and so forth. And this idea of graphical thinking is important. We'll talk more about graphical thinking in future chapters, but like we've already touched on in this chapter, graphical thinking is structured thinking, it's hierarchical thinking, it's visual thinking, but we still have ideas and concepts. So it's not just colors and splashes of lines and colors together. It's not artistic, although it can be artistic. We're actually capturing knowledge and we're capturing data and facts. We're actually capturing things of a higher order in terms of creating technology, in terms of producing goods and services for other people, in terms of mathematical breakthroughs, and so forth. And speaking of science, we've got Dr. Richard Feynman, and he is a Nobel Prize-winning physicist. You may have heard his name before or not. Brilliant physicist. And when he was very young, he realized that imagination, creativity, visualization, these are the most important parts of the process of creative thinking and enjoying breakthroughs in our careers. As we work through problems, mind maps can eliminate problems and they can explode ideas. Another way you can use mind maps is by doing game playing. You can play games with mind maps much easier than with other sorts of tools that are available in terms of helping us think. There are other thinking and education tools that are out there, but mind maps are super flexible, and because they're so visual, we can play around with them, use them in a game-like fashion much more than other tools. Now we've got Tony Buzan, and the important thing about Tony is that he created rules for modern mind mapping. And he actually claimed the idea was inspired originally, his ideas in particular and his rules for modern mind mapping were inspired by Alfred Korzybski and his general semantics rules popularized in science fiction novels such as those by Robert A. Heinlein and many others. And so we see that various mind mappers in history had very similar ideas to you and I about the great value of mind maps and mind mapping. Again, the act of mind mapping, it's very often a creative act. There's a lot of literally action involved in the creation of a mind map. We are able to think and think very creatively in many cases as we work through a mind map. And then there's also the result of the mind mapping process, which is the mind map itself, which quite often we can hand to other people, and we can use it as a training tool, we can use it as a memorization tool, use it as a learning tool for ourselves as well. Great for planning. There are so many different uses for mind mapping. We'll be talking about those in future chapters. Now, one little fun fact and figure about mind mapping is that Boeing aircraft, but the Boeing company, you might know it as, was actually first mapped out. It was created in essence by using a huge mind map, and that mind map of the Boeing company, the Boeing aircraft company, was 25 feet long. A little fact there. So mind maps have been used. The bottom line is mind mapping has been used for a long time, and mind maps themselves, the artifacts, what's left behind from the mind mapping process, have been used for quite some time, and they are very, very effective, very useful, and also a whole lot of fun.